All right, today we are going to work on removing some effect dependencies. And so this article from React is helping us. Currently working on a React Native project. We've got some ESLint errors that are saying, or warnings. The linter is telling us that we have too many dependencies, or we have removed a dependency that should be there based on what we have inside of our use effect. And we need to clean them up. So maybe that's just the gist of it. Basically, we've set up biome. I'll turn on the warnings to, I guess, switch the warning to an error for if we have any dependencies that shouldn't be in the array, and also if we have any of any dependencies that are missing, and kind of work through how can we keep that from being a dependency. So looking at this article, I want to go through this and see what we can glean from it. We can read it together. I process out loud. We can learn together on this. So let's start from the top. I think the top for me, though, is you might not need an effect. I think it's good to remember is that you would use an effect only to synchronize with an outside system. And so that would be potentially another front-end framework. That could be another level of persistence, like local storage or async storage in React Native, and a database. You're making a request to a different service altogether. It could be RxJS because you're listening to streams. We've done that a lot in this project. So I'm verbally processing, and then you're kind of getting the commentary as I walk through this. But we don't need effects based on state. We need effects that we need to sync up with an outside state, so an external system. So with that in mind, let's see if we can remove some of these effect dependencies. So when you write an effect, the linter will verify that you've included every reactive value like a prop or a local state in React. If the effect reads in the list of your effects dependencies, that your effect reads in the list of dependencies, this ensures that your effect remains synchronized with the latest prop state in your component. Unnecessary dependencies may cause your effect to run too often or even create an infinite loop. Yep, so we either get extra renders or extra calls to this effect function, or we get an infinite loop because the effect is causing a state change based on a dependency, and we keep looping over those changes. It causes a change that causes a change that causes a change. So follow this guide, and what we're going to benefit from is it's going to help with the infinite loops, what to do, how to remove some of those dependencies that we want to remove, and how to read a value from your effect without reacting to it. I've personally used a ref for this. We've been doing this a little more than normal. I would say not a lot, but more than normal, and I thought it was a smell. But based on what this article is going to show us, I feel like the ref is still an option. We'll kind of go into that. So how and why to avoid object and function dependencies. I think this is going to be a big win for what we're working on, is that what we do with functions and dependencies. I'll move on. So dependencies should match the code. When you write an effect, you first specify the start and stop, whatever you want your effect to be doing. So the start is here, and then you would do something, you'd connect, so that's probably the start, and then we stop. This is our cleanup. So then if you leave the effect dependencies empty, then the linter is going to complain. And so it says, like we're showing more than we'd like here, but yeah. The linter says you are using this connection, you're using room ID. That is a reactive property, and we need to be able to react to that. We need to have an effect on that. So let's show more. So fill them in according to what your linter says. Always put in all of the reactive values, your props and your state in here that your effect uses, and then try to figure out how you can start removing them. So effects react to reactive values. Since room ID is a reactive value, being a prop, it'll cause a re-render when it changes. The linter verifies that you've specified it as a dependency. If room ID receives a different value, React will synchronize your effect. This ensures that the chat stays connected to the selected room and reacts to the dropdown. which is great. If that room ID were to change, we'd handle the connection. This works as expected. To remove a dependency, we have to prove it's not a dependency. I think that's there. It's to remove a reactive dependency, we have to prove that it's not reactive. And so, or not a dependency. We have to have room ID, so that's not optional. But we could, I think that what they're going to get into is if we were to remove it, it's going to complain again. But if we made it a global, something that's got a single reference, it will not change, the value doesn't update to cause this effect, then we've made it a global and it's all good. Now that the room ID is not a reactive and can't change on re-render, it doesn't need to be a dependency. This is why this is why you could now specify an empty array. The effect really doesn't depend on any reactive values anymore. It's also, so it really doesn't need to rerun when any of the component props change. True. So to change a dependency, change the code. I like this vernacular they start getting into here, is that we have to prove. It's like an equation is what they're going to talk about here pretty soon. So first, you might have noticed a pattern that we follow. First, you change the code of your effect or how your reactive values are declared. Then you follow the linter and adjust the dependencies to match the code you've changed. If you're not happy with the list of dependencies, you go back to the first step. You change the code of your effect. The last part is important. If you want to change the dependencies, change the surrounding code first. Surrounding makes me think the function inside, but we'll get there. You can think of the dependency list as a list of reactive values, used by your effects code. You don't choose what to put on that list. The list describes your code. To change the dependencies list, change the code. Yep. This might feel like solving an equation. I'd like to have more of a conversation about what that equation looks like. Of what does it look like to adjust the equation? That feels like first principles. So don't ignore the linter. This is what's very risky, introduces some weird bugs, and you are lying to React. So removing unnecessary dependencies, I guess back on this, we could learn more, but I want to enforce that we are going to listen to the linter and follow it to the T. Removing unnecessary dependencies. Every time you adjust the effects dependencies to reflect the code, look at the dependency list. Does it make sense of the effect to rerun when any of these dependencies change? Sometimes the answer is no. You might want to re-execute different parts of your effect under different conditions. You might want to only read, give me a second. You might want to only read the latest value of some dependency instead of reacting to its changes. You might want to re-execute different parts of your effect under different conditions. Maybe splitting up the effect. You might want to only read the latest value of some dependencies instead of reacting to its changes. That's where I would use a ref. And I think they're going to introduce something that is experimental, but I think a ref would be the current, less experimental way to do that. A dependency may change too often unintentionally because it's an object or a function. A dependency may change too often unintentionally because it's an object or function. Okay, we're constructing an object or a function and it's changing more often than we prefer. So to find the right solution, you need to answer a few questions about your effect. Let's walk through. Should this code move to an event handler? This one's easy. If I'm changing a state based on an event, then I don't need an effect to trigger based off of state. A state effect is not an outside system. So yes, we would move this logic or this functionality into our handler. I don't think I would use this language. Should this code move to an event handler? Okay. Should this code, yeah, it's being handled by a trigger of an event. Okay, so we're tracking there. We would also have concerns about the theme. The theme should change the notification style. So what do we do here? We move this logic in here, and then the theme would get passed in as a notification. It's getting its current value. We're not having to affect on that. That's great. Now the code is in the event handler. Yes. So next, is your effect doing several unrelated things? The next question you'd ask yourself is whether the effect is doing several unrelated things. Yes. If we have one effect to go get the cities and update the cities array, gorgeous. And then this is a good example. We do all these things, but then when we want to get the cities, and then what we want to avoid is having a single effect doing two independent processes. Yes, two separate, it's a separation of concern. Then we check if we have a selected city, we're going to set the areas. That's not what we want. We want to split that into two effects. Ka-chow. So now, the first effect only reruns on the country, and the other one runs on the city changes. Beautiful. So are you ready? Are you reading some? I'm ready. Are you ready? Are you reading some state to calculate the next state? Are you reading some state to calculate the next state? That felt like what we're doing a little bit with the event handler above. But if we take in messages and oh, I see. Yeah. We're going to have messages as the dependency. We're spreading in the changes of messages. So this would be the infinite loop problem. We need to use the setter, the state changer, previous value being passed in. There's probably a better name for this. So let's go down and see what they do. This. To fix this, don't read messages directly inside of the effect. Instead, pass an updater function. Yes, so setter or updater function. Notice how your effect does not read the messages variable directly. You only need to pass an updater function. React puts your updater function in a queue. React puts your updater function in a queue. Very nice. So the setter actually queues up the changes that we're sending across, making sure we end up with the value that we expect at the end. That's great. That seems obvious, but good to know that it's doing it that way. And we'll provide the messages argument to it during the next render. We'll provide the messages argument. Okay. This is why the effect doesn't need to depend. The latest messages is passed in through, pass an updater function. Yes. This is why the effect doesn't need to depend on messages anymore. As a result, to fix this, receiving a chat message will no longer make the chat reconnect. Gorgeous. Yeah, we're not reconnecting every time we call messages because now we don't have the messages dependency like we did before. We can just have the arrow function and take in the latest messages and spread it in. Okay, this is where I think things get weird, is this like under construction because we're going to use an experimental API. And if we keep going down, we wrap an event handler from the props. We take in a function, that's an arrow function getting passed in. So every time the parent that renders chat room will recreate this function. So that can cause problems, but they're going to put it inside of a use effect event, which means on receive change, take the message that you want to pass to it. Just start getting concerned about the reactive value going into a ref. Have to do some idea. Have to have some idea around the storing this in a ref. Effect events aren't reactive, so you don't need to specify them as dependencies. As a result, like how far along are we with this experiment, separating reactive and non-reactive code on visit. Split out the non-reactive code into an effect event. Effect event. If the room ID changes, handle that. I like how they gave this effect a name. I wish the effects had names in general. I think that's my biggest issue with effects. So the solution again is to split out the non-reactive code. Separating reactive and non-reactive. The reactive part is the room ID. The non-reactive part is how to handle logging the visit. Log visit. Room ID. Oh, I see. Notification count could change. We're just not going to react on that. I feel like now we're able to pull out and say, I want to react because of this, and don't worry about anything else. But I do need that last value. Pause for a second. Hold on. Okay, so moving on, does some reactive value change unintentionally? This is the interesting one. Is if I put room ID inside of an object, this object, every time chat room changes, I get a new object. So that becomes a dependency, which is going to make that linter happy, but I get a new object on every render. So the options is going to change drastically. The better thing to do is either pull it out as a global. That's not a global yet. Let's keep going down. Yeah, if you see, like if you type in this box down below, we're reconnecting on every type, every character we change because messages changes. We create a new object every time messages changes, which changes this. We reconnect every time. So this is an interesting example. So we want to know if these objects are different, and that looks like they're identical. And if we say object is object, it is false. Object and function dependencies can make your effect resynchronize. The problem is only affects in JavaScript only new created objects and function considered distinct. Only newly created object and functions is considered distinct from all others. It doesn't matter that the contents inside of them may be the same. Yes, that deep comparison between the two, that is going to be confusing. So we are not able to have a deep comparison. Now, this reference will be the same on every render of chat room and every reactive state value. So that global will make it possible. We could create a function outside and pass in the value of that. That would and we're creating that object with a function inside the effect. That'll help. But we could also create the object inside of the effect, just like we did with the function above. And we've got a good set of dependencies. This is the same because they're primitive values. Okay. And the other thing is to construct. Yeah, construct that object inside. Wait. They're saying it's a problem. Thanks to the fix, no longer reconnects. Yeah, we're in a good state. However, it does reconnect when you change the room ID, which is intended. As long as we declare reactive values dependency, read primitive values from objects. So this is fine, but it's a reactive value, and we don't want to react if we got a new object every time. So every time the parent that renders chat room is going to create a new object here. So it's better to deconstruct and pass those as separate dependencies. And that way we can do we can have a primitive comparison. Primitive comparison. Okay, so the logic gets a little repetitive, but we're able to be very explicit about the information that we actually depend on. Okay, calculate primitive values from functions. Yes, now we have a function that returns, and this gets recreated on every render of what renders chat room. So to avoid making a dependency, call it outside the effect. Call it, get the details you need from it, and if the values are primitives, then we'll have a comparison that we know if it's unique or not, and we will affect appropriately. Recap. Okay, I feel much better about this. The one cool thing is to go through here is I do have some challenges to go through. And so I think these will be important as it's rolling through the console here. You'll be able to run through these 4 challenges. Looks like there's 4. Yeah. So give those a shot and put your knowledge to the test. Instead of using, make sure I'm tracking here. I don't want to lean into this experimental API up front. If they only had one case of using the experimental API, then that's the count. Use effect event. In this example, you want to log a visit every time the room ID changes. You want to include the current notification count on every log, but you don't want to change. You don't want to change to, right? But you don't want a change to notification count to trigger a log event. Yes. So if this value changes, I still want to log the event. I don't want to set up a callback, so I have to use this experimental API. I'm curious, if we take this example here and store this value inside of a ref, does our ref get updated every time? Do we get the last value because of the ref? Maybe we should go look at React and see what they're doing. Okay, so we see the effect in React's repo. We'll zoom in. Dispatcher, resolve dispatcher, use event effect. I want to see that inside the dispatcher. All right, trying to follow the chain of thought here, and I'm not able to get back into resolver dispatcher. Resolver dispatcher comes from the top, and it's a dispatcher is a type. Where does this header come from? Shared. A and H. What are you talking about? Get cache for type. Yeah, where is this? Shared. Looks like a package. React symbols. Okay, let's get back up to the root. Shared. Okay, got packages. Shared. Oh, nice. Give me a second. All right, coming to a quick end. I'm looking for the React shared internals, and I get here and I come to a dead end. So I could keep digging and we're going to stop there. But I think the important part is this is a function that you can call that has other values that are reactive, but that's not what you want your effect to be based off of. So if you're willing to go the experimental route, otherwise, I could see that you have an effect to sync up with a value that's changing and just put it into a ref. And then you'd have this opportunity to use that ref value or ref values, maybe it's a collection, I don't know, but you're able to pass those into your effects and use them as needed. Because it's odd in React that you would want to, at least in React's world, is that you don't want to respond based on a React event cycle, a rendering cycle. That if state changes, it's just this ripple effect. And so if you're trying to prevent some of these effects from happening, you want the latest value, but you only want to have an effect on something specific. That makes me think that we're trying to do too much inside of a front-end framework, and we need to pull state out and send all the events to it. User events, server events, any subscription-specific details. We're just trying to subscribe to something external, handle that outside of React, and keep it in JavaScript and TypeScript, and then have React subscribe to the end result, a derived value, a derived state. And then that's what gets me excited more and more about things like RxJS and maybe how we maybe you're pinpointing, no, I don't want Redux to be my whole store, but I do want a feature or a piece of the system to be deterministic. And so if I could take some portion of the system and put it in something like RxJS, maybe there's another opportunity with Yotai. Anyways, I just want to push events to another system, and I will let React know when I'm ready at a finalized state that it should respond appropriately. But if I have a new room ID, communicate to an outside system and say, hey, here's the latest room ID that we have. What is our React app? What does our UI need to do um, based on the result of the room ID changing? Not let React be responsible for that change. We need to take our logic out of React. I think this is just making things more difficult. We're depending more and more on a React system when we see things like this. When I find myself more and more pushing logic and outside of the React system and wanting to go more towards the vanilla JavaScript, vanilla TypeScript route. Okay, much shorter in this round, but I hope that this has helped you with your effects. And if you'd like more, please put a you know put a comment down and note that anything that you're specifically struggling with, that'd be a blast to work on. Otherwise, you guys have a great day. Adios.